Hi students, you are welcome in this tutorial. Students, in this tutorial we are going to discuss about a new literary theory called New Historicism. And as always, we divide our tutorial into a few points, and this tutorial we also will divide into three major points. The first, I will talk about the beginning of this New Historicism, or how New Historicism developed, who are the pioneers and how it has shaped nowadays. Second, we will talk about differences between old historicism and new historicism, or simply historicism and new historicism, because new historicism has the base of historicism. First historicism developed, and later based on it we have new historicism. So this will be the second point. And in the last point we will talk about how to analyze a text based on new historicism, or what new historicist critics do. A very famous section as we find in Peter Barry's book. So friends, let's start the tutorial. Now, when we think about new historicism, we find that its roots were found in 1970s literary critiques, and many critics talked about some alterations in the field of literature, or in the analysis, and they have taken a new kind of challenges in their literary works. For example, here we have J.W. Lever's book, which challenged the conservative ideas of Jacobean theatre, and they felt that there should be the link or correspondence between the events happened at that time and the analysis of literary text. The simple thing is that they wanted to combine, or based on this correspondence they wanted to analyze the literary text. And the very book here we have This Tragedy of the State, a study of Jacobean drama, which is written in 1971. And in that book we find that J.W. Lever challenges the conservative concept of the Jacobean theatre, and from there we find that new changes came in the literary theory, or literary critics adopted this kind of things in their criticism. And from there we find that the development, or the gradual development of this new historicism began or started. And then friends, we have a very prominent name who pioneered this field of new historicism in 1980. He is an American critic, Stephen Greenblatt, and he coined this term called New Historicism. He wrote a book in 1980, Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Moore to Shakespeare. And in that book, he talked elaborately about this New Historicism. He says that there is only literary text is not significant, but there should be the other kind of documents need to be consulted while discussing or while analyzing the literary text. So the thing is very simple. He wanted to make correspondence between the literary text and non-literary text. The very idea of non-literary text gained in that particular theory of new historicism, and Greenblatt talked about the non-literary texts very prominently, and from there we find that the equal weightage has been given to literary and non-literary text. Now the very question arises in our mind, why these critics have given much importance or more importance to the non-literary texts, because according to them non-literary texts also are very significant to analyze the particular literary text. And now what is this new historicism? Here we have a few definitions. First, read the definition given by Peter Barry, so that we can understand easily what is this new historicism. A simple definition of the new historicism is that it is a method based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts, usually of the same historical period. So friends, if you look at this statement or definition, you find that they give equal weightage to literary and non-literary texts. And here the emphasis is on parallel reading. Now what is this parallel reading? Parallel reading is nothing but the study of the non-literary texts of that particular era or of that particular age, while analyzing the literary texts. Mean these both processes are the parallel kind of processes, and they are similar kind of processes. If you want to analyze this literary text, you need to analyze, or you need to read these non-literary texts. And further, again we have a second opinion or second statement here of Louis Montrose, and he also talks about the historicity of the text and textuality of the history. So let's see his opinion. Here we have an American critic, Louis Montrose, who says that new historicism is a combined interest in the textuality of history, the historicity of text. Now friends, here we need to decode this historicity of the texts and textuality of the history. What is this historicity of the texts? Historicity of the text means nothing but the analysis of the text based on the history, or how history is there in the text. Historicity of the text means the history occurred in the text, and textuality of the history means nothing but how history is documented or how history is written, means how history is represented in the text. So these two kind of things are combined, or they are given equal weightage. The historicity of the text means there are literary texts, and in those literary texts we find some kind of history, or there is the events of history, or the history is represented in that literary text. And at the same time, in the same era, in the same period, in the same age, how history is textualized, means how history is written, means how history is represented in the texts. Here we are talking about non-literary text, means there can be the texts which are purely written on the history, or we can say that the histories or the books of histories, and the other allied or related fields also can be considered in the writing of this history. And the analysis of this non-literary texts and literary texts will give you a new kind of truth, a new kind of idea, a new kind of analysis, a new kind of what we can say that the particular text analysis. So we can gain from this historicity of the text and textuality of the history. So this is given or stated by Louis Montrose, who is also an American critic. Now friends, let me tell you that these critics have given equal weightage to literary and non-literary texts. It is for the first time in the history of literary criticism that non-literary texts also are considered for the analysis. Till this time, or till 1970s, we found that there are so many critics and there are so many theories of the analysis of literature. But in this theory, we found that non-literary texts also are considered. And this is a new kind of thing in the history of literary criticism. So to understand this concept of historicity of the texts and textuality of the history, we need to know about a statement made by Richard Wilson and Richard Dutton, because they very clearly stated in their essay, based on this historicity of the text and textuality of the history or new criticism, they wrote an essay called New Historicism and Renaissance Drama. And in that New Historicism and Renaissance Drama, they talk about this concept of Louis Montrose. Let's read. Where earlier criticism has mystified Shakespeare as an incarnation of spoken English, it means New Historicism found the plays embedded in other written texts such as penal, medical and colonial documents. Read within this archival continuum, what they represented was not harmony but the violence of the Puritan attack on carnival, the imposition of slavery, the rise of patriarchy, the hounding of deviants and the crashing of prison gates during what Foucault called the age of confinement at the dawn of carceral society. Now friends, we find here very clear view of these two critics, Wilson and Dutton. They say that in this context, the non-literary texts like penal, medical, law documents or religious documents are analyzed, and based on this analysis, we also have an analysis of that literary text. And here they take a very prominent example of Shakespeare, and they find that there are many things in the non-literary text. For example, we find that the rise of patriarchy, that the rise of colonialism, that again some kind of forces working in the society, and all those have been represented in the Shakespeare, and particularly they take example of Shakespeare. Generally we find there are many examples taken from the Shakespearean plays for this historicism and new historicism. So friends, this is the idea of historicism. Here you have to remember one thing very significantly, that is, while analyzing a literary text, new historicist critics analyze non-literary texts also. So literary and non-literary texts, both kind of texts are significant in new historicism. This is the very significant thing we need to remember. Now let's move to the next point, that is, what is the difference between historicism and new historicism? Because historicism, in a way we can say that the base of new historicism. There are similarities as well the differences between these two kind of methods or these two kind of theories. So I will read the very first difference between the two is, in historicism we have background of the text. Now what is there in the historicism? Generally in historicism we think about the foreground and background of the text and how this text is evolved in particular age or in particular background. In new historicism we find that equal weightage is given to literary and non-literary text, as I am repeating same kind of thing often. So literary and non-literary texts are given equal weightage. This is the difference. Second difference, combination of historical framework. In historicism we find that, or old historicism, there is the combination of historical framework. Means a literary text is seen through a historical framework. Means that particular age the events happened in that particular age around that particular literary text. And in new historicism we find that the framework of non-literary texts is discussed, is considered for the analysis. The third difference, historical approach related to events happened in history. Now in old historicism we find historical approach, but in new historicism we find that there is the historicist approach. Now what is this historicist approach? Historicist approach means the things written or the texts written on the history, or they believe in the documentation of the history. Fourth difference we have, old historicism looked outside the text for analysis, and its opposite, new historicism, is based on the deconstructionist view, that is the view of Jacques Derrida, nothing outside the text. Now this is a very we can say big difference between the two. In old historicism we find that events happened in the history and these events are considered for the analysis of literary text. And here in new historicism there is nothing outside the text. Actually this view is given by Jacques Derrida, and this is a very we can say that the prominent view in new historicism. They believe in deconstructionist ideas and they believe only in the texts written. So this difference is significant. The fifth difference or the last difference we have, only analyzes the past time based on the text. Now old historicism analyzes the past events and it is based on the literary text. In its opposite, we find that in new historicism remakes the past and hence the new analysis of the text. Now it is the remaking of the past, reconstructing of the past, means only the events which are given in the history are not analyzed, but out of that events or out of that literary documents a new kind of truth, a new kind of things are put forward, and it is a remaking of the old past, of the old literature, or the we can say that the literary text. So new kind of things are there in the new historicism. So friend, this is the clear distinction between old historicism and new historicism. If you find any problem or if you have anything to suggest regarding this, you can comment me. So now friends, let's move to the last or third point, that is how to analyze a text based on new historicism, or how new historicist critics analyze the text. The very first thing new historicist critics do is they juxtapose literary and non-literary texts, reading the former in the light of the latter. Now as we are discussing about literary and non-literary text, the very first thing that they juxtapose the non-literary text beside the literary text and they analyze both the things, non-literary and literary texts. Number two, they try thereby to defamiliarize the canonical literary text, detaching it from the accumulated weight of previous literary scholarship and seeing it as if new. Now this kind of thing is significant because they came to a new kind of thing in the new historicism, that they defamiliarize the first literary criticism of that particular text, or in simple words we can say that they go beyond the prejudice, they go beyond the previous analysis of the literary text, and they put new kind of things in the new historicism on that particular text. The third thing, they focus attention within both text and co-text on issues of state power and how it is maintained, on patriarchal structures and their perpetuation, and on the process of colonization with its accompanying mindset. Now, in this third statement, or in this third point, we find that they consider text and co-text, and they find new kind of things. For example, is there any prevailing things which are there in the society who are described, or which are described in the non-literary texts? For example, colonization, patriarchy, mindset, social issues, or whatever kind of things are there in non-literary texts, they are considered for the literary texts. So this is the third. Fourth statement we have, they make use in doing so of aspects of the post-structuralist outlook, especially Derrida's notion that every facet of reality is textualized. Now here we have Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault talks about the discourse of power, and Jacques Derrida talks about the textuality, or the thing we previously discussed as nothing outside of the text. Now here, if nothing outside of the text, these new historicist critics analyze non-literary co-texts in particular light, in the light of Foucault's discourse analysis, or in the light of Jacques Derrida's nothing outside of the text philosophy. And they consider and they draw out new kind of truth from this literary text, and in a way they are remaking the literary text, they are remaking the literary analysis. So these four things are very prominent, which these new historicist critics do. So friends, this is all about new historicist criticism, new historicist theory, or a method. Very generally we can say that it is founded by Stephen Greenblatt, an American critic, in 1918. So this thing you have to remember. So friends, this is all about new historicism. If you have any question, any problem, you can comment below. I will answer to your comments, and if you find any difficulty, please feel free to contact me through an email which I have given in the about section of this Literature Simply channel. So like this video, share this video among your friends, and subscribe to Literature Simply, and don't forget to press the bell notification icon for updates.